Welcome to episode one of Oneself, the podcast where we're just trying to get back in shape, in all shapes and forms. I am Stephen Maher. With me today is Adam Bartleman, and with me always is Adam Bartleman. Adam, thank you so much for being with me here today, my friend.
Thank you, Stephen. I'm grateful to be here.
Amazing, amazing. So this is episode one, right? This is the bedrock. I think the start of any good thing, right, is just to give a little context, a little background of who we are, what we're trying to do. If our knowledge or our experiences provide any value to you, that's for all the better. Um, yeah. So, like I said, my name is Steven, right? I grew up outside of Boston. I am 29 years old, and life has been a journey for me. I was born with something called persistent hyperplastic primary vitreous, which kind of shaped my whole formative years, which just means I'm blind in my left eye. And it's kind of my joke with the universe that it's like, I have terrible vision, but I think I can see. You know what I mean? And just see in terms of like hopefully how things kind of are, and try to identify truth in the world where there's so much smoke and mirrors, or try to find truth as much as I can. I don't know a lot, but I like to think I know some things. So that was a guiding light for my years, y'all. That was very formative. My family was pretty athletic, right? My dad was a good athlete, my siblings were pretty good athletes, but seeing out of one eye doesn't really mean you have good hand-eye coordination, right?
Depth perception.
Depth perception, bro. Dude, there's this I was playing baseball when I was younger, and I struck out like every single time. And but every time I go up to bat and be like, I'm gonna get this one, you know what I mean? And I was like in the third grade or something, but the coaches felt so bad they kept giving me the game ball. Because like
Oh, that's
they
sweet.
know the deal, so I was getting like the pity game balls and be like, and Steven really tried this game, and so we're gonna give him something, but what did that do? That led me to more creative paths, that led me more towards music. And music has been a huge part of my life as a musician. And I've been a traveler, I've been a wanderer, ever since I was 18. I kind of left my parents' place, and I've lived in all sorts of places. And Adam and I met in Guatemala, on Lake Atitlan. And that was a beautiful experience. And that's just some quick highlights, y'all, of 29 years, right? But that's a large part of it. I've always been a wanderer. But Adam, tell me a little bit about yourself, my friend. Let the people know a little bit of who you are. Give some highlights, some lowlights, whatever you
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
you feel.
Yeah, in a nutshell, I guess. Well, yeah, I'm Adam. I'm 37 years old. I am from North Vancouver, Canada. And growing up for me too, yeah, I would have to say something similar. Always just been questioning my reality. I've always been seeking, I've always been looking for something. Seeking a role model, I think that I could never find my entire life. Kind of feeling as a young guy that I didn't have that male role model that I really wanted. My dad left. My dad left our family when I was 12. He was a little bit absent before that, just working all the time. And I'd see him every now and then, but didn't really have that sort of connection that I wished I'd had. And being a sensitive guy, and coming up through a family that had an immense amount of trauma, I had some formative experiences that came in the way of some mental health problems, like depression, and being medicated at a very young age. I think overly medicated, which led into addiction in my older years, starting in my teenage years actually. And yeah, basically some addiction, uh, a dysregulated nervous system that was always seeking some sort of balance, or seeking to feel something. Being on antidepressants was very numbed out, and yeah, as I said, seeking to feel something led me into a career as a firefighter. Led me into a lot of unfavorable situations, some violence, that kind of thing. yeah, coming out the other end with the help of a lot of meditation, some plant medicine ceremonies started to change my path. And now I'm walking this one aligned with my brother Steven here.
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, no, it was, dude, it was an honor and a privilege to meet you, and and it still is, right? To still be in each other's lives. And you mentioned fathers, right? And as men, I really relate to that. I was searching for mentors in other men, from a young
Yeah.
age. And my dad, generations of alcoholism, right? My great
Mhm.
grandfather came over from Ireland, in the 1920s, and he was a drinker. His dad was a drinker. My dad was a drinker, and to my dad's credit, like when he was 44, he shifted his addiction and he became like an ultra marathon runner.
Mm.
And very common in addiction, right? When it's like when you finally, if someone has the fortune, right, to tackle their addiction, and they go on a different path, even if it's an extreme one, right? Like extreme health, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
he was beat up after those races, but it was very common, right, in that
Yeah.
path. And so really, really proud of him for doing that. But I was already like almost out of high school by that point. So like I was pretty much grown, almost out of the house, by that point. And have a good relationship with him now. But in those younger years, it was like, like looking around, and he was working, right? He was like functioning alcoholic, so it wasn't like, there wasn't food on the table, but it was never, there was never connection there, right?
Mm.
In my experience. Um, how important you think fathers are, man? The presence of them, the absence of them. Like
Yeah.
what was your experience with with your dad, or what lessons did you learn from that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to agree with that. Well, I mean, first of all, I wanted to address how you're looking for role models, right? And I think that in many instances, when we don't have that strong male role model at home, like a good father connection, we end up looking to the other kids, in the schoolyard. Like in my case, some of my friends' older brothers who were, kind of delinquents and
Yeah.
didn't lead me down the best path. But yeah, it's interesting that there's a lot of topics to talk about there, a lot of little kind of side roads we can go down. But ultimately, for it's an interesting conversation, especially being that we're in existing in a patriarchal society, and men have a lot of pressure put on them. Men are in many cases the source of the negative energy, a lot of the abuse in our society because of that power dynamic. And so having a system in which that is where that is the case, and having men essentially out there rudderless in the storm, in many cases, it's a tough situation, and it's one that I wish to see improved, and I think you do too.
Yeah, man. I think when it just comes to my own life, I just I look on the my past self with empathy of just like just lost. You know what I mean? Like you're just like you said, like you're a boat in a storm without a rudder, and that's a tough place to be in. To be in life without direction, without any sort of purpose, without any sort of like fulfillment, and you're searching.
Yeah.
And it's like, where do you go? Like you don't even necessarily, you're looking for guidance, right? Like you're looking for
Yeah.
someone to just come in and be like, hey man, like here's some sort of blueprint. I mean, everyone's different, everyone has their strengths, their weaknesses, their personalities. Like you're going to find something that you want to dedicate your time to. But an overall structure of just like how to navigate through the world, I think, was absent for me,
Yeah.
and I think is that absent for a lot of people. And
Mhm.
I just, and I think, yeah, man, it stems from like, yeah, like that father wound, right? You know what I'm saying? Like that pain of like, it's not in my immediate house, it's not in my immediate vicinity. So where do I go? What do I do?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's especially here in the West, it's really been as we've talked about before. I like to look a few generations back, and if you look at how things have played out here, we had we had the world wars, and we'll talk more specifically like World War II, and that's leading into the, the generation, they're having the baby boomers as their children. In our case, like our parents are baby boomers. They're coming up raised by traumatized parents, whether they were directly involved in in armed conflict or not. That was a very stressful time for the entire world, and that was a very stressed out generation, a generation that did not acknowledge mental health issues and pass that on to their kids. I know that that was the case for my dad and the way that he treated me, and yeah, we came into a situation again in my case where my dad was actually great when I was little. He was really present, teaching me how to play sports and all that, teaching me how to ride a bike, that kind of thing. But as I got a little bit older, he got a little more focused on his business. He was more absent, and then by age 12 he divorced my mom and moved in with someone else. Which I think is that's not every case is exactly the same, but there are common threads that are followed here in many cases, and not having that male role model around, yeah, that's how it kind of played out in my life, and
Yeah, man, or even they can be around but not present. You know what I mean? Like
totally,
you said,
yes,
like you can be in the room with somebody and they're
yeah,
not present,
yeah,
right? Like they're not, they're someplace else. And that was more my experience, I guess, where, he'd come home and that's when the beers opened, right? And it's like if someone's drunk, there's no communication when someone's drunk. Like if there's two people
no,
talking, if you're everyone's, if you're ever in a bar and you hear two drunk people talking and you're not, there's no communication there.
no,
You know what I mean? Like nothing is being said. It's just
no,
words going back and forth and people just
exactly,
talking over each other. So it's just like
yeah,
there's no communication there. There's no depth. No meaning behind that presence, even if you are in the same room, right? And so that's tough, man. That's tough. I'm sure people relate to, some version of that, whatever it is, but it's just, you know,
absolutely,
it's hard. It's hard to walk through. I'm sorry, dude, to go through that, at a young age. It's tough, man. And, I have
yeah.
a lot of empathy for everyone going through that.
Yeah, and it can be tough, especially in every case. I mean, some people don't have their dad there even at all. Sometimes they're completely physically absent, and then those of us that maybe had a dad who was physically present or sporadically physically present can kind of downplay our experience, especially as men when when we've been programmed into believing that we're not supposed to really share emotions or especially complain about anything, to address the fact that we didn't have the psychological support, the spiritual support, the love from someone who was physically present and maybe putting food on the table. In our society, that's generally not accepted. We're not allowed to have those conversations, and I think it's an important conversation to have because yeah, even if the person's physically present but emotionally, spiritually absent, that can be equally or even more damaging than someone who's left. When we play the comparison game, it never really gets us anywhere. So
Right.
I think it's an important thing to acknowledge that, like, yeah, even if dad was physically around, like, it doesn't mean that things were good. Even if it wasn't a terribly abusive situation, things can be those circumstances can still result in some serious pain and some serious mental health problems down the line, some serious addictions down the line. So it's all a valid conversation.
Yeah, man. Yeah, no, yeah, it's hard to compare, someone's situation to another, right? It's just like, yeah, that, like you said, I don't think that gets you anywhere, but I just think in the absence of, we're coming from the male perspective, right? Like as men, we can't speak on the perspective of women necessarily because we're not that, right? Um, but when it comes to how important that gap is in a man, if they don't have it, what does that look like? Like what have you seen with people if they haven't had that strong support system or that strong mentor figure in a man or as a young boy growing up? Like how does that manifest itself when they're older?
Yeah, in my experience, and yeah, no, again, speaking from my experience and the way I perceive things, my opinion is that we always end up seeking that in one way or another. So if dad was emotionally unavailable, was not present, and we didn't get the love and support, the validation that we wanted, then we end up seeking it from other men. And in my experience, growing up playing some sports, working in construction, working in emergency services, I see men seeking validation from each other in very toxic ways over and over again. And to me, it's always been quite clear that it comes from this lack of acceptance for themselves that came from that was modeled to them by a generation, of fathers who were wounded themselves, right? And this is generational trauma played out.
Yeah, yeah. If it's not there in a good example, they'll inevitably navigate towards someone who's just an example, right?
Yeah,
Probably bad, or probably negative, right? And their influence towards that person. I know in my experience, right, like it was more towards my brother, right, who I would say was a net negative in my life, in the formative years. You know what I mean?
yeah.
It's just like
I
because
shouldn't
he was
laugh. It's
going.
like
No, no, man. Like
I know what
it's
you mean.
yeah, it's all love now at this point. But it's just um you know, all the bad first things that I've ever done were like him putting them in front of me,
Yeah,
right? You know what I mean? Whether that's marijuana or porn, or he's like, look at this or smoke this or check this out. It's just like,
yeah, yeah,
but because he was right there, you know what I mean? Like, and he was around, and like I wanted um his approval or
yeah,
his mentorship or his guidance, which he had none either. You know what I mean? And he was getting it from his, knucklehead friends, around
yeah.
him who were showing him that stuff too. And it's just, yeah, it's just
Exactly.
this like, this big cycle of, negative influence, right? You
Yeah.
know,
The older kids on the playground, and I can't remember who said it, but someone said if we don't raise it might have been Gabor Mate. If we don't raise our kids then properly, then like the kids at school will raise them for you. And for me, in my example, it was I was the oldest sibling, but it was my friends' older brothers who were introducing all of those same things, all of those negative things, and trying to you want to fit in, you want to get the approval of the older boys, because that's essentially playing out a fatherly role to you. And when we don't do that in a healthy way, we just loop in that cycle endlessly, from my observation. As I've said before, and I think we've discussed before, I've met and worked with and interacted with a lot of 40 and 50-year-old boys, because, and not to criticize, because I would put myself in there at times as well, in that camp of looking at these people and kind of listening to some of the conversations, and looking at examining some of the behavior, and going, you know what, this is pretty much exactly what we were talking about and doing in, like,
when you were
first
12 years
year.
old.
Yeah, 12 years old, or like first year university. It's like maybe like
Yeah.
12-year-old mindset plus some alcohol, and
Yeah.
like in an adult sized body. It's like, it's dangerous. It's
Yeah.
silly, and it's immature, and it's sad, and it's not to criticize anyone or
No.
anything. It's just a reflection on the fact that we can do so much better. We can do, and that's just something that has come up for me so repeatedly, is understanding that we can do so much better as men, and that we don't need to gatekeep this information, this wisdom between generations. And I think, just to add a little side note here, that it for me, in my observation, comes down to this sort of myth that we have, especially in the West, about the self-made man, and how much we love the story of, like, the scrappy underdog making it by themselves, and how we adhere to that. And even though, like, I don't think that archetype is very realistic, I don't think it's real. We all exist in community, and this thought that, like, well, I had to suffer when I was coming up, so I'm not gonna hold you by the hand and guide you lovingly, to the next generation. I'm just gonna watch you suffer too, because that's how I had to deal with it. It's like, no, let's bring in some love and help share wisdom between generations.
Yeah, man, I never understood that where, I've heard it's conflicting, right? Because it's like, don't you want life to be easier for your children? But then it's like, well, you want them to be tough to take on the world. And it's like, well,
Oh boy, yeah.
what do you like? How does that make any sense? Like, that's a conflicting thing. And from, I mean, from my own experience, it just, if I could talk to my younger self, right, like as this version of me now, it's like, I would try to help, right? Like
Yeah.
help, like, hey man, don't do that, like do this, like, avoid those pitfalls. I can't, right? I can't go back in time and change things. And like, honestly, that path makes you who you are. So it's like, can you regret it? Not necessarily, right? I'm very
Mm-mm.
grateful for my experiences and the journey I've taken. And like you said, like some people get, I met old men, right? Like, in the twilight of their life, who, are still, like angry, like just angry, right? Like angry at the world, angry at getting old, and just angry, right? And um, I don't,
Checking out young women,
yeah, man, just
still
like,
addicted to alcohol, like,
yeah,
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 like,
man,
yeah,
yeah. And it's like, when I was younger too, and it's when you feel those, when you try those things, right? When you try those things, um and it does make you feel something, right? And it does, fill a void, right? That you have, right? And you can't put a name on it. Or I couldn't put a label on it at that age, but it's like, when I'm doing these things, and it's like, well, it takes me out of the reality that I'm in at that moment in time,
yeah.
and
Serves a
you know,
purpose.
it serves a purpose, right? And not a good one necessarily in like retrospect, but it
Mm-mm.
does fill something. And I guess my question to you is just, why is that? Why did that help in that moment in time? Not help, but why did I gravitate towards that maybe, as
Yeah,
opposed, you know what I mean? Like, why was I like that? Okay, I'm gonna keep doing that because it did something for me.
yeah. It doesn't necessarily help, but it gives the illusion of relief in
Right,
that moment,
right,
right? And yeah, in the absence of wisdom that could help guide us in a more aligned way, sometimes those things are the only things available to us to help get us through a tough time. And when we're living in a society where that's modeled to us as complete, not only acceptable but celebrated, especially as men, and to speak on alcohol specifically, it's scary, it's tragic, and it's alarming how much that particular substance is pushed and celebrated, because it leads to so much harm. It leads to so much abuse, self-abuse, and abuse of others. Physical violence with other men, sexual violence toward women, violence toward any vulnerable population. And yeah, I think that we gravitate toward it because of its availability, and also the way that it's celebrated, the way that it's attached to masculinity in this really sick and twisted way. It's almost like it feels kind of like, it's kind of like that old quote, like, beer can make you feel the way that you should feel without beer, the way that you should feel without it. And which I always thought was pretty clever, but funny little quote. But the way that it comes in and attaches with masculinity, like, I remember, uh for whatever reason, for in my family seems to be a theme of being able to drink a lot. There's a lot of alcoholism in my family and high tolerance for alcohol. And I remember being absolutely celebrated by my peers when I was 14, 15, and up, for being able to drink a lot of alcohol. And like, what is not to judge the whole, I don't know, the whole process, but like, what a profoundly stupid thing to be celebrated for. Like how much poison can you take into your body? And like and I like I understand the kind of twisted thinking behind it, like this sort of like strength and endurance kind of weird twisted perception. But it's yeah, it's strongly attached with this toxic twisted masculine archetype that we have.
Yeah, man, I remember drinking when I was younger, and it's like, you know, I wouldn't like feel something until it was like way too far gone.
Mm,
And so it's like, okay, like one, two, three, four, it's like I don't even necessarily feel it. Obviously it's in my system, but then it's like, and then I just keep going. And at some point along the line, I recognize that I don't know when to stop. You know what I mean? And and that's scary, right? Because it's like, you do things the night before you might not remember.
definitely.
Your bed could be covered in vomit. um you know the, like it's just you're not in control, right?
Yep.
In multiple respects.
Yep.
And um that scared the shit out of me. And then you see people around me, and been to funerals related to alcoholism, liver failure, or
Mhm.
whatever the case was, and you're like, okay, like this is quite literally life or death. You know what I mean? If you keep going down a certain path. And yeah, man, I think that that really woke me up, was that lack of control. So I guess, to pose the question, where it's just like, when you feel out of control, what are some ways that you think people can kind of put a hand back on the wheel of their life?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think it comes down to honesty, to looking at the situation and taking an honest look at yourself and who you are, where you're at, and who you want to be, where you want to be at. Because for me, I had a similar sort of experience where it was I was a little bit older. I was getting into my late 20s. I had been a professional firefighter for a few years, and I had times when I was like, out on calls at work, and responding to some sort of incident that's involved alcohol, whether it's a car accident or someone's passed out in public or whatever it is, some violent instance, and seeing really intoxicated people and thinking to myself, oh man, like I was literally that intoxicated just like 3 or 4 days ago.
Yeah,
Somehow I was able to never like put myself in those situations where it was like that bad, but I'd be like, man, I was just as drunk as this guy. And
yeah. And he might be
and
going
it
to prison for the rest of his life for hitting somebody, drunk
yeah,
driving, or you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
it's just like, yeah, like it's one mistake, or
exactly. And thankfully I never hurt anyone else, and I never got behind the wheel of a car. I had a really good education on that. So I'm grateful for that, but it was this realization that yeah, I didn't feel like I was actually being very responsible. I felt like I was a hypocrite. I felt like I wasn't a good, like, model citizen, especially, which I think was something that I really held, being a firefighter, because generally was,
yeah,
except like, man, I drink really heavily, and that's really common in emergency services too. As a side note, it's like this really heavy substance abuse culture. But to come back to your question, like, or to respond to what you said, I was getting to this place of realizing that I wasn't being who I wanted to be. I was thinking, like, what if like the building that I live in had a fire, or somebody needed help, and they knocked on my door because they know me, and I'm like, in the middle of the night, and I can't wake up because I'm passed out, wasted. It started to really not sit well with me. That was when, yeah, to answer your question, in my own experience, I just started to take a real honest look at myself and go like, man, I'm not really like being the person that I see myself. I'm not really living up to my potential. I'm not really being that rock solid friend, family member, neighbor, community member that I know that I can be. And why is that? Why do I like drinking so much? What is it in me that's hurting so badly that getting super intoxicated seems like a good, like normal thing to do? You know, it was kind of that's what it was for me. So I think that like with everything, we just got to take an honest look at ourselves. And that can be difficult because we have a lot of defenses in place to avoid feeling that pain.
Yeah, man, it was really hard for me to like look in the mirror,
Yeah.
but that's where the buck stops, right? And that's where accountability is, you know.
Accountability. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, man. It was just like, yeah, like I felt like you said waste, right? Like waste of potential. It's like I felt like a waste,
Yeah.
like just like, um, y- I felt like I wasn't contributing anything, in that moment of time. But, when it comes to filling that void or feeling that, or like just like really reconciling with myself, who I was, and like why I was doing the things that I was doing and what behaviors were not serving me anymore,
Yeah.
and what things I did to cope and what things I did to just get to the next day and get
Yeah.
through the day and and you said like first responders, yeah, because I'm sure you guys see hell every day, like you see accidents and the worst side of humanity, and it's just like I didn't have that experience, right? You know what I mean? But I know what it feels like to be just feel like you're going nowhere, like aimless, and yeah, and like just like without guidance, right? And I don't know, it only really shifted when I first, yeah, yeah, was like you said, like was just honest with myself.
Yeah, it's that soul level longing for something better is the same however it's manifesting, and it doesn't mean that one experience is worse or more even more intense than another, like the first responder experience, the military experience. I can't speak to that, but these things are just whatever's on the person who's in that situation, that it's on their life path. It's part of their karmic path, and ultimately no one's pain is worse than anyone else's. And finding that point where we get honest with ourselves and have the courage to look in the mirror is, to put it very simply, is essentially finding our rock bottom. Rock bottom's different for everyone else, and you might find your rock bottom a few different times. But when we get there and it gets to this place where you just feel like it can't be worse, and I'm not going to take worse anymore. I'm not going to choose this anymore. It has to get better. That rock bottom feeling, there's nowhere to go but up from here. That's when we've reached this place with the maturity of our soul's journey where it's like, okay, now it's time to put a hand back on the wheel, as you said, like take back control, and let's consciously start to apply our energy in the direction of pulling out of this illusion, because we're not supposed to be like this. We're not supposed to be unhappy. Men are not supposed to be abusing their power. Men are not supposed to be abusing those that are, to just use this language very, very briefly, below them on the pyramid in society. That's not what a true leader or a true masculine energy does. It doesn't abuse power. It uses that to lift others up and to protect, right? It's about protection and guidance rather than abuse and hoarding resources. So whatever it is, we get to that place where it's now time to um truthfully look in the mirror and go, okay, it's time to put on the big boy pants and look at what masculinity, in our case, because this is what, we're two men sitting here, uh, look at what masculinity really means.
Yeah, man. And what would you think is like the first step? Like what's that first? Like you said, hidden rock bottom, being accountability. Okay, like you're at that point, and like what's like the first couple steps forward? Like where do you go from there?
Yeah, if you're feeling directionless at that point, then seeking some guidance, seeking some help, and wherever it's coming from, just making sure to not move too quickly. You know, whether you're gonna like start reading something, you're gonna seek guidance in the form of a coach or therapist for someone who's really still kind of grinding around in that rock bottom and not really uh, even finding the motivation yet. Sometimes plant medicine ceremonies can be a good thing at that point where it can just give some perspective and some direction, not to then make that the new addiction as many people have. But yeah, essentially getting curious, getting honest, looking in the mirror, and then looking to the reality to see what it is that's showing up. Because the moment that you are making that decision, the moment that your awareness is getting to the place of realizing that a change has to be made, you don't really, truthfully, you don't really have to do that much at that point. You just have to open and look to see what life is going to provide you. Because in that moment, when you are making that choice inwardly, it's going to be reflected outwardly. You're going to have something synchronistically come into your path, whether it's a book, whether it's a conversation with a friend, something is going to come. So basically, to answer your question a little more briefly, just begin to listen and not control so much. And again, especially for the masculine mind, we're so used to attempting to control our environment. And the masculine mind, the masculine energy, because this is a masculine energy created society. So this applies to men and women. Recognizing that controlling masculine mind is like, it's time to, okay, we're going to start to put that in the back seat rather than the driver's seat, and we're going to start to listen. We're going to start to surrender a little bit, listen to what life is showing us, raise that feminine energy, and see what's there.
Yeah, man. And so talking masculine energy, right? Like feminine energy, like I'm just trying to like go down to basics, right? Like you kind of touched on it before of like what does that look like? You know, what does that look like, right? Like what does masculine energy look like to you? What does healthy feminine energy look like to you? Or let me say healthy masculine, healthy feminine, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not even to we're using these phrases for our conversation here, and there are many different ways of looking at these things, and I'm not even a huge fan of always breaking things down that much. I ultimately that's still like a separation consciousness in my opinion. But for the sake of the conversation with our
No, I
traditional,
mean take that
yeah,
question as you will though too, you
yeah.
know, like what how would you rephrase that and come back to me with what I just said?
Well, just looking at wherever there's an imbalance in us, which when we start to get honest and we start to really look, which means to really feel, we start to pull the energy away from the thinking mind and more into the intuitive space, into the heart. What we would generally talk about in the new age spiritual community as, like, balancing the masculine and feminine, which is great. And these phrases and definitions are fine for the parameters for structuring a conversation. Absolutely. But I just wanted to say it can go far beyond that. But yeah, the feminine energy being traditionally more uh um all encompassing spherical thinking, rather than the masculine linear, one thing after another in a very straight line, very overly rational and not as creative. Like the feminine understanding. We look to nature. We look to nature. We look to how energy flows in nature. We look to like we're briefly discussing water before jumping on the call. The water being an expression of feminine energy in nature. It's flowing. It's creative. It takes the path of least resistance. Taking our cues from nature, essentially, um, seeing how she does things, and not trying to control so much, because that's sort of if we're using that definition, the masculine approach of trying to control, of trying to box everything in and put everything in right angles and straight lines.
Yeah, yeah, I was a part of a group and someone said something that really like struck with me, where it's like when you're holding on to something so tight, right? And it's like that, like there's that like that tension, and but that's an active choice of, right, like holding on, to whatever it is, like internally, and it's just like what, you can let it go. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah, but we've been modeled a system in which we believe that the only way to be is to be constantly doing, to
Yeah,
be constantly holding on, and that's an inversion. Really, most of our reality, our society as we understand it, is pretty much a direct inversion of how the natural flow of things goes. So it's like trying to hold on to something, and a great analogy is like trying to hold on to water, right? Like you can try really hard, but it's not going to work, and that yeah, you have to surrender to that realization at some point. Um, but yeah,
yeah, man. No, 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 that's really fair. I think that, when it came to my life, especially getting out of my head a lot with all this stuff, it was like just to get more into my body, um,
yes,
proved to be super influential, right? And so that was, from, I would say, 18 on, I was, even still dabbling in a lot of negative habits, but like, um, or addictions,
yeah,
for being honest. But getting into my body, like it quieted my mind, and
exactly,
in whatever capacity that was, even if it's just going for a walk, like, I know it's super simple, but even just after going for a walk, I feel a lot better. If I'm
yeah.
facing a problem or stressed out, it's just, there's a magic in getting back into my body.
Yeah, and that's huge. And because what would the masculine mind say in that moment? Like, no, there's no time for a walk. You got to keep grinding, And it's like, no, no, no. There is time for a walk. There's always time for a walk. There's always time for a seat on the meditation cushion, and getting back into the body is huge because that's pulling the energy back down into where the intuitive energy comes through, essentially the heart space, right? The space of being of the navel, right? Like we're getting like more incorporated into our more incorporated, the root of that word, right? Into our corporeal state, into our bodies, right? And that's yeah, that's super important because if we spend our entire time, all of our energy in the mind, it leads to us neglecting our bodies. And to give my own example, when I was more like that, I constantly had heartburn. I was chewing Tums like every day
Yeah,
for years. It's just, I have heartburn until one day, out of nowhere, for some reason, I just started breathing deeply, and instantly everything was fixed. And I go, oh, I knew instantaneously there was nothing wrong with anything in my stomach. There was just an issue of stress. I was breathing in a very shallow way for years, causing my, digestion to be upset and causing me to be, um, in a great state of discomfort. And all I had to do was breathe more deeply. I had to breathe deeper into my body. Instantly fixed. No, no more need to be chewing Tums every day.
yeah,
And that was my, it's like we're here, we're embodied, we're not the masculine mind in this linear progression is always trying to get to the next thing, is always trying to get to whatever the next goal is, when we really just have to be embodied, present, come into our bodies and recognize this is where we're at. This is where we're at right now, and it's a great lesson on presence. Being present in our bodies is being present and engaged with our surroundings as well, understanding that this is all where it's happening anyway. So if we want to get right with ourselves, we gotta become embodied. We gotta bring in that awareness of surrender, that as we discussed, that feminine energy.
yeah. Yeah, well, Adam, I think that's a good place to cap it for episode 1 of Oneself. Everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us. If you like what you heard, there's a lot of ways to support us for free. Leaving a review wherever you heard this, whether it's Spotify or Apple, or subscribing on YouTube or liking it. We're gonna keep talking about this stuff, and it's an important reminder to just keep it in your life if you want to be on that path, right? Like, we hope to just be a reminder, nothing more, right? Nothing less.
Yes.
If anything, just a reminder of like, hey, we're walking this path. We might not know you, but you're walking your path wherever you are, and in that way, we're forming some sort of community, and we just appreciate you being there regardless. And we hope you're finding your way.
Well said.
Yeah, man.
Thank you,
We'll see you
brother.
next time. And Adam, yeah, thanks as always.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.